Well, good evening and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim to this evening's presentation, which is coming to you live from the Chapter 81 studios here in Leeds. Welcome wherever you are in the UK and indeed wherever you are in the world. Now, this evening we've got something very special for you. As we eagerly await a new play about our Leeds community, Me At Cantors, which debuts this coming weekend, we are with the two authors of the play, and I'll introduce them both to you in just a moment. Some housekeeping first. Please do ask questions. You do this, as always, by typing whatever you'd like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen. And as ever, we'll do our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. You will also notice a chat facility, and this will allow you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar, should you wish to do so. Finally, we are recording this event, and it will be available on our website at milim.org.uk in the next couple of days. And so to our guests this evening. Anthony Clavane, to my right, was born and brought up in Leeds. He attended the Selig Brodetsky Jewish Day School and then Roundhay School before heading south, where he says he has remained in exile for several decades. He was a secondary school teacher of history before becoming a journalist, working for local, regional and national newspapers. His longest stint was as a sports writer at the Sunday Mirror. In recent years, he's written a column for the Yorkshire Post and taught journalism and storytelling at the University of Essex. Anthony has written 3 books: Promised Land, Does Your Rabbi Know You're Here? And A Yorkshire Tragedy. Promised Land was a part memoir, part social history of growing up in the Leeds Jewish community and the joys and agonies of supporting Leeds United. And an excellent book it is too. It was named both Football Book of the Year and Sports Book of the Year by the National Sporting Club and Sports Book of the Year by the Radio 2 Book Club. Anthony has had 3 plays staged in Leeds: Promised Land, Leeds Lads and Playing the Joker. He's also won Press Gazette Feature Writer of the Year and BT Scriptwriter of the Year. Mike Levy was also born in Leeds and is a writer and a historian. He grew up in Chapeltown, went to Harehill's Secondary Modern School and was a regular visitor to Cantors Fish Bar. A former teacher and journalist, his first job was as sub-editor for the Leeds-based Fish Friars Review. I mean, you couldn't make this up, could you? And his most recent work has been a book, Get the Children Out, Unsung Heroes of the Kindertransport. And in September 2022, he spoke at the Quayside as chair of the new Harwich Kindertransport Memorial, which now adorns that Essex port. In 2018, his first World War play, I Hear My Name Be Called, was produced by Milim. It was based on the letters of Anthony and Mike's uncle. Anthony and Mike, I should say, are cousins. Maya Tompovsky, MM, who was killed just before the armistice. A warm welcome to both of you. So Anthony, tell us in a few words, what's the play about?
It's about the Leeds Jewish community in the 1950s, and it's a great story. I think the story of the Jewish community in Chapeltown is so full of joy and poignancy, and it needs to be celebrated. And in short, it's about the people who lived and worked and ate fish and chips at Cantors and danced and met their future wives and husbands and met their friends for life outside the Cantors fish and chip shop on the pavement. And the teenagers in the 50s are now people in their 80s and 90s today. And we wanted to celebrate the amazing storytelling abilities of our parents and grandparents.
So have you two worked together before? Mike, is this your first project
I think
together?
This is our first project, our first writing project together. It is, yes. We started working on this nearly 2 years ago, I think, when we first interviewed my cousin and Anthony's dad, Emil Clavane, just as a family document. We wanted to get his stories about his growing up in Leeds, and he wanted to take us, in fact, to the present-day Cantors, stand outside and reminisce about his youthful experiences there and what it was like growing up with the other adolescents and young people as part of a vibrant Jewish community. And I think that's when Anthony and I thought, great stories here. This would make a good play.
So where did it go from there?
Well, it was a great sort of coincidence that as Mike and I thought of this idea of what, it would be great to work together, but to work on this story, let's interview my dad, Mike's cousin, Emil Clavane, who is, I have to say, he doesn't like me saying it, but he's 94, so amazing person. I then rang up Phil, who is a director of Millim, I think, that Phil Goldstone, and I said to him, look, we know how great Millim is, and Millim worked with Mike on the play about Maya. Is there a chance you'd be interested? It just so happened that Millim were at that point, also thinking along similar lines of a project which would collect the archival sort of histories of that's an ongoing project that I know Millim have done, and the book From the Leylands to LS17 documents brilliantly. But this was a new phase, and so with Phil and of course Alan Benstock and Carol Gold, and we all met in the pub, which is where all the best things happen. And it was the pub in Street Lane. Is it the Deer Park? I think it's the Deer Park. And we all met, didn't we? And Mike was on Zoom, but I was there in the flesh. And it was great timing because, thanks to Millim, we managed to get the organisational backing. And then, of course, the finance came from the Leeds City of Culture 2023. So we're indebted to them. And this was 2 years ago, and our dream was to make it happen. And this is the week it happens. Mike and I have just been to the first day of rehearsals, and we are, I don't know if I can speak for Mike as well, but I'm thinking we'll share this. We are so proud of the fact that it's happening with 6 fantastic professional actors, with a great director, great producer, assistant producer, movement director. It's all happening, and it's putting Leeds Jewish community on the map, or on the stage, let's be more precise.
So, Mike, you've seen this play in rehearsal. What sort of emotion does that bring about when you're actually seeing your creation come to life, as it were?
Well, there's always a very special moment when you hear the words that you've written down on blank pieces of paper or the back of an envelope come to life. Never quite sure until you hear actors speaking your lines. I think Anthony will agree with me. Never quite sure whether it works or not. Does it sound natural? Does it sound, rhythmic? Does it sound listenable to? Does it make sense? So today we heard it read out for the first time. There was what's called a table reading, where they read through the entire play. And we thought it worked well. The other actors laughed in all the right places, didn't they? It seemed that it caught their attention. It was emotional. And for me, anyway, it was certainly very special. I mean, I've written lots of plays for colleges, for school groups, taken stuff to Edinburgh myself, but I've never been involved until now in my septuagenarian years with a professional production. So it was incredibly special for me.
How many interviews was the play based on? How many people gave their stories? You said there were 6 actors. Presumably there were more than 6 people who were spoken to.
Well, between 10 and 12 people were spoken to. And this is, again, to pay tribute to Phil and Carol, who carried out the interviews. And we did the first one with my dad, Emil, and then, about 10, 11, 12 more were done. And so we're very, very thankful to the people who did them. And by the way, the people who were interviewed, people in their 80s and 90s, came to rehearsal today. It was a remarkable thing, to see this, because we all sat around in a circle. There were about 8 people there today. And then the actors sat around, and they're in their 70s and 80s. And then everyone interacted. And the actors who had read the play and read through the play were asking for stories, and they were observing how amazing. I mean, the talent that you've got in the cast is astonishing, but they were just praising the way that people, the eloquence of the storytelling that went on today, and the humour and the way that people interact, they were closely observing them. So the interviewees are also stars in this, and their stories are being put on stage. And I think it was even if the play wasn't happening on Sunday, and it is, and we're thankful for that, just to see today the interaction between, and let's put it like this, older people who have got great stories to tell, and interacting with the cast, and learning and bouncing off each other. Even that in itself would have made a fantastic sort of mini documentary. Even
how did the information come to you? Was it sort of tapes or videos or transcriptions? How did you actually get the information about these stories?
Well, the interviews were taped by Phil and Carol, and then it was the whole interviews, and sometimes were quite lengthy, were thankfully transcribed. So we had the transcriptions to work with and to go through and try and sort. So it's kind of our first pass probably was an editing job, wasn't it? Going through the massive material that we had, which hopefully will be put into an archive in its own right, and then trying to find themes, trying to find a shape to what was being said. We did have that initial question about, should this be pure verbatim theatre, which means using only what is being said by the interviewees. And we had a bit of a struggle between ourselves as to whether we go down that route or not. And in the end, we decided to make it part verbatim because we wanted to give it a bit more shape than simply it being a kind of a documentary. So yes, it came to us, thankfully, marvelously, and saved us an awful lot of time as written Word document transcription.
So how do you deal with that? You've got a massive information. You've edited it a little bit, but how do you sort of pull a story from it?
Well, I'm not going to pretend it came effortlessly to us, because this was a great, we've both written in lots of different forms before, but this was the first time I'd done this kind of thing. And I was wondering, Jonathan, how we're going to do it, because we didn't have a preconceived idea of a story. But you can't just simply put, well, we went to the Judean Club, and then we went, to Cantors, and then we went to the Astoria, and we went to Blackpool. You can't just put then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. I mean, in a way, when I hear my dad telling these stories, I just think these are great. But you can't justify just putting that on stage as a story, and that's not the art of storytelling. So we had to find a story. And after working with the material for a while, it sort of evolved. It came to us that there was a story, which I don't want to give too much away from. No spoilers here, I mean, this isn't, like Netflix where I can reveal spoilers. And what I will say though is that there is a sort of love story of sorts going on, a will they, won't they kind of thing, and that was a way in. Now, this brings up the issue of, do you put everything in a play which is factually correct? Now, yes, on the one hand, you can't get things wrong, like we've already been asked today by the actors. Well, did you mean Dr. Samuel, Dr. Samuels? Did you mean Barrack Street or Barrack Lane? And the details need to be right, because you can't make stuff up, like where Cantors was, Hare Hills Avenue, Chapeltown Road. You've got to get all that right, and the names of people who really existed have to be correct. But in order to give it a dramatic, sense of tension and a kind of let's call it a hook, you need to find a story that is partly invented. So we did sort of fictionalize things, but we didn't fictionalize real things. We just brought the characters together. Now the characters emerged, and even today in rehearsal, I was getting a real sense of who those characters were. All six of them, became their own identities. Somebody, for example, let's give an example. Those in the Jewish community in Leeds will know what I'm talking about. Now, when you went on holiday and you lived in Leeds, on the whole, you tend to go to Blackpool, but some people went to St Anne's. Now, this might just seem, oh, they went to St Anne's. Let's face it, if you were back in the 50s, if you were well off, you went to St Anne's, and if you were not that well off, you went to Blackpool. Now, there are differences within the community. People get these, the way that people talk about Jewish communities, and especially politically in recent years, as though there's one sort of homogenous group, but there are class differences within the group, within the community. There are differences to do with, which shuls you go to, the differences between more secular parts, more religious parts. And so, these differences we wanted to bring out. And the two main characters live in different parts of Leeds. So it's not that everybody lived in Chapeltown. Some people live in Hare Hills. Some people, like my dad, lived in Gipton, of all places. I mean, this is surprising to a lot of people that not a lot of Jewish people live there, but he did. So we wanted to draw out, to put it quite sort of simplistically, class differences. And, therefore, someone who even left Chapeltown and went to Moortown and then Old Woodley, would be someone who might be leaving their childhood friend who's still in Chapeltown and drifting apart. So these issues took place. So it's not all about, people from the outside might say, well, it's a story about, Jewishness. Yes and no, but it's also about these ordinary stories. What happens when your best friend moves slightly up in the world, their family get a little bit better off, and you lose your lifetime friendship? What happens when you meet someone from the other side of the tracks? All these stories were eked out, and they shaped the way that we thought about the main storyline. And therefore, it wasn't a preconceived idea. We didn't say, well, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. The material that we got that was collected in the interviews, this material dictated and helped shape our creative shaping of the play.
We took a long time going through the verbatim material, which I think there must have been about 40 or 50 pages of it, if not more.
Yeah.
And, it was very difficult to know what to cut and what to keep in. It's quite a difficult process. Mm. In the end, we kept, in the first or second or third or fourth pass, we kept most of it there. And then we think, well, that's a fantastic story, but is it going to help the complete narrative? So we had to make some really difficult decisions about what to leave out, and whether we thought, although that is a great story, it's similar to the other story we just had, and it would just be repeating in thematic terms what we just heard. Had to keep, as our director kept reminding the actors and ourselves today, the audience is king and queen here. We've got to remember what the audience is going to take in the 50 minutes or 1 hour that we've got to perform.
But we also made some discoveries, and one of the biggest discoveries, and in a way now hearing and seeing the play today makes me think we could have made not more of it, but maybe it could still make a separate play. One of the big discoveries for me was that the great artist who was born in Leeds and Jewish, Jacob Kramer, and brought up in Leeds, but he became a very well-known, famous painter and artist in the 1920s and 1930s, ended up back in Leeds, and nobody knew who he was, but he used to sit in Cantors, this unpretentious, humble fish and chip bar, or fish bar, let's call it that. He'd sit there in his long black coat, and he'd be drawing the customers. So any of us might have been drawn by him, not knowing that we were being drawn by him. And this forms one of the plot lines of the play. But Jacob Kramer, we didn't know, it's true to say, we didn't have any idea he was one of the regulars of Cantors. And this emerged. I mean, to be fair, it emerged not through the interviews, but through a very good, almost 12 pages of an article that was based on an interview with Lawrence Cantor in Shabbat Shalom, which is the Etz Chaim magazine. And we thought, oh, this is fascinating. Jacob Kramer was there. So we wrote him into the play. It's a very sad story about Jacob Kramer, if you read Alan Bennett's diaries, he talks about coming across someone he calls a tramp, someone lying on a park bench outside the Leeds Art Gallery and covered in newspapers, and then said, and then I looked closely, it was Jacob Kramer, the great Leeds Jewish artist, and the fact that Kramer ended up towards the end of his life with certain issues, certain problems, it's a really, really sad, I'd call it a tragic story, but he was still, right till the end, drawing people, and his portraits are fantastic portraits. And, there is still, if you go to the Leeds City Art Gallery, as you just, in the foyer, you see this great big painting there. I think it's A Day of Atonement. I think it's...
Day of Atonement, yes. It's one of his most famous works. And of course, there's still a good market for Kramer's work. He's still a sort of known artist. How interesting.
Actually,
when we finished the play, actually, I thought, wouldn't it be great to actually own a Kramer drawing? But how can I afford such a thing? And by sheer fluke and chance, one of his drawings came up, a charcoal drawing, came up of what I think must be his mother. It's called Old Lady Knitting. And it was in our local gallery, our local auction house, which is 10 minutes walk from where we live. And it was the opening bid price was like £80 or something.
Incredible.
So although he is a well-established artist, there's, his drawings and so on are really going for a song, which is kind of part of the fact that he's been forgotten. So I put a bid in. I've never done that in my life, but I didn't even know how to do it. I'd been watching all these Ealing comedies where you dare scratch your ear for, sold to the man over there for 20 grand. But I think I eventually got it. Somebody else was bidding against me. So I got it for about 120, I think it was. But I thought it was worth having. And it's a beautiful, large drawing of this old lady knitting in charcoal, which looks like the kind of style of drawings that he did, probably not in Cantors, but probably early on after he went to the Slade School of Art in about 1915, 1920. But it may be a Cantors one. So anyway, that was a really every time I go into our living room and see the Jacob Kramer there, I get a certain buzz.
So somewhat serendipitous and probably serendipitous. And I'm itching to ask about your stint at the National Fish Friars Review, and whether there were any sort of gems of knowledge that you picked up at that time that proved to be useful in writing this play.
The only thing I can remember, I'm talking about 1967 when I was a sub-editor on the Fish Friars Review. I remember it was my headline. I had to write the headlines, and one was Barnsley Batter Ban, and I was very pleased with that, actually.
Nice alliteration.
The Barnsley chip shops had banned a certain type of batter. That was the big story.
BBB.
BBB.
Barnsley Batter Ban.
That's right. Because it rocked the fish and chip world, as you can imagine.
One of the great headlines of all time.
Of course, Leeds was home to the National Association of Fish Friars, which had NAF written on its on its doorway.
Well, when I went to the job there, I remember the editor, it was only the editor and me, and he said, "Look, lad, it looks like, it might be a bit of a joke, but this is the biggest circulated trade magazine in Britain, because, it went to every fish and chip shop in the country." So, although it was a bit of a joke.
Your stories always ended up as fish and chip
paper. Yeah.
Literally.
Yes.
What do you think it was about Cantors that made it such a magnet for the young people of the time? Because presumably there were other places they could have congregated, or other shops they could have.
Well, I think it's first of all worth saying, as we say in the play, it was the centre of Jewish gravity, and just to sort of remove, although they were very tasty fish and chips, absolutely, just to sort of remove the eating fish and chips side of it, it symbolised the heart of the Jewish community, because this is what made it important. Young people would meet outside Cantors. There's a pavement, and it's still there today, and it's not very big. But, if they were coming away from the Judean club, or they'd been dancing, the story or whatever it was, they would say, "See you at Cantors, meet you at Cantors." And there's so many stories about, we bought the chips and we made them last all the way up till, Chapeltown Road. But it was where you met people in a time when, and this is going back to a time when people, didn't eat out, particularly, whether you were Jewish or non-Jewish, eating out. I mean, even when I grew up in the 70s, I never went to eat out apart from at Cantors. It wasn't a thing, was it? But eating out is a big thing now. But B, of course, getting kosher food out, where would you go? And women, and it was mainly women who would cook at home, and it was giving, your mum or your wife a break. But thirdly, it was the social thing of meeting outside Cantors, particularly for Jewish teenagers who would, and this is, people often say to me, oh, well, were they very, rowdy and loutish, and did they drink alcohol and do worse than that? But no, it wasn't about that. I mean, maybe a bit loud, quite loud, and they did get complaints. But, it wasn't like they were being lager louts or anything. They stood there and just, as young teenagers do, talked about everything, laughed, met their future best friends, met their future spouses, were stood up by people. It was meet me at Cantors. And Cantors became so well known, not just within the Jewish community, but it became a bus stop or a tram stop. So it was like the bus conductor was like, we've got to Cantors now, or, get off at Cantors. And it remains today. Most of Jewish Leeds in Chapeltown is no longer there. I mean, the buildings might be there, but and often they're not. The shuls are now mosques or whatever it is. But the one thing which is still there is Cantors. It's not obviously not Jewish owned anymore, and hasn't been for a couple of decades or more. But it's still there as a name because they kept the name Cantors because it was so famous, if you like, within not just the Jewish community, but in Chapeltown and Moortown. And it's amazing that 100 years or so after it was founded, it's still there with its name. And obviously it's changed in some ways, but you talk to Jewish people today, of several generations, and they say, you know what, I remember Cantors. They don't necessarily talk about the fish and chips. They talk about who they met and what went on at Cantors. And it's the great stories about Cantors symbolising the heart, the centre of gravity of the Jewish community that are important.
I think two things. Cooking in oil was a big thing because, people wouldn't go to the non-kosher ones where they cooked in lard in those days very often. But also the geography played a really big part because if you lived in Chapel Allerton or Moortown and you were going to the Judean, it was a halfway point. It was a place where people from the north of Leeds would meet people from the centre of Leeds. And as Anthony said, a largish pavement in which they could congregate. So it was, as you rightly say, a centre of gravity.
And what do you remember of it growing up in Chapeltown?
I remember it. We used to live in Grange Crescent, which was only like 10 minutes away. And I was a school friend of Lawrence Cantor, the son of Harold. So I remember it really well. And there's a story that we didn't put in the play because it's my story. It's not from the 50s. But I'm sure Lawrence wouldn't mind me telling this story. But when we were like teenagers, say 17, 18-year-olds, maybe a bit younger, we'd go in there and we used to have this little trick that we played on Harold Cantor, who was the very genial, ebullient owner, very thick black rimmed glasses, I remember. And he was absolutely devoted to his son, Lawrence, who I think was an only child. And we used to play, looking back, I'm not too proud of this, but it's the sort of thing that you did as a teenager. When you asked for a bag of chips, and as Harold was scooping the chips into the bag, you would say at a crucial point, "Oh, how's Lawrence getting on?" And Harold's eyes would mist over with fatherly pride. And you'd say, "Oh, the lad is doing so well. His school, he should see his school results." And he kept on scooping as it was, and you get 3 or 4 times. And everyone did this. I mean, it was just a lovely joke. But he was a lovely man, was Harold Cantor. He used to give us a lift, actually, to Harold's school, where Lawrence went as well. So I've got quite vivid memories, although by my stage, the cafe bit had gone. Because in the cafe, tell us about what
No, I was going to say, when he gave you a lift in the car, was it? Did it smell of fish?
Absolutely. It was an old Ford, I can't remember what Ford Cortina, I think it was, a black Ford Cortina that absolutely, reeked of fried chips, basically. Yeah, it did. It was nice. I liked it, actually.
But it's interesting, your recollections and your comments about eating out. I mean, I remember we would get fish and chips from Cantors once or twice a year. It was really, it was really a treat.
Yeah.
And I remember it vividly because we also didn't eat out unless we were away somewhere. And they were incredible.
I mean, when I went to university in the late 70s, and I remember we went out with a group of friends and went to a pizza place, and it was the first time I'd ever had a pizza. My kids are so shocked when I tell them this. I said, and I suddenly thought, apart from Cantors, there was a place called Brian's in Headingley, which we would go to every now and then. But it was a big treat, wasn't it?
There in the play, actually, the people who gave us the reminiscences talked about another chip shop called Harris's, which I don't remember.
I don't know.
Somewhere down Chapeltown Road. And there's this lovely story that they told us, and they reminded us today, I think, again, that the chips were better in Harris's and the fish was better in Cantors. So they would buy the chips in Harris's and then walk up the road to get their fish. Which is,
what a Jewish thing to do.
What a Jewish thing to do. The customer is all important here. But
although it sounds, it's not like the biggest story of all. It's that lovely, quirky story, which was natural to people that they did it, and you could sense it. But it is, as you say, it does epitomise a Jewish attitude. But can you think of anyone doing that today? Oh, I'll go to that chip shop and then I'll get the fish at that shop and I'll mix them.
My grandmother would get the bus to Tesco because the toilet rolls were cheaper there, and then go somewhere else to do the rest of the shopping. What about these interviews? Did anything stand out? Anything sort of grab you about any of the interviews you read as being a story that really gelled or was particularly memorable?
Well, I mean, I'm a bit biased, but I've got to say I was very moved by my dad's story, which was, again, you can't really give it away too much, but I was very moved by by his stories about Cantors, and it did involve, without giving too much away, it did involve meeting my mum eventually. Which was on a tram in Sheepscot. But, I said to him, if you kind of went back in time, went back to Cantors, what would be the most memorable thing? And he sort of talked about the characters. Now, when he talked about the characters, there was this person and that person, and it suddenly brought to life very vividly a way of life that has sort of vanished. So what really struck me, I mean, I can give you the different characters and what they did, and they're lovely, funny stories and sad stories. Again, it's in the play. So just if you don't mind me saying more generally, what struck me about it was that there was a way of life, a vibrant, tightly knit, working class Jewish Leeds community, where it wasn't just that there were Jewish shops and there were Jewish dances and Jewish fish and chip shop. I mean, it was just bigger than that. Something that's just bigger than Jewish owned this, Jewish owned that. And it was talking about your mum doing what she did and going to Tesco's. I mean, there were so many little stories about that. But what I kind of felt really strongly was, nearly in all the stories, it was this sense of loss. I'm not wanting to be negative about the present because it's still, we've got a very, vibrant, close-knit community, but it's moved upwards, hasn't it? It moved up the hill. So when it was in Chapeltown, it was very Chapeltowny, but then obviously it moved Chapel Allerton, Moortown, or Woodley, Shadwell Lane, it's like moved northwards. This was when the second and third generation of Jews had found their feet in Leeds. they said today in the rehearsals, they were talking about it, and they said, their grandparents might have spoken Russian or Yiddish, but these were like Jews wanting to belong, wanting to be part of the Leeds, the English, community, but not wanting to lose their identity either. So that to me is a fantastic story of how an immigrant community felt a sense of belonging in Leeds, found its feet, third generation really in. I mean, they started off in the Leylands. We know about this story, amazing story. We didn't want to write about that, and we didn't want to write about it necessarily today, although there's lots of interesting things. We wanted to focus on a part of the history of the Leeds Jewish community that has now gone, and there's a certain nostalgia for that, but there's a certain sense of, my dad is 94. I wanted to get his stories down, and they should be stories that my children and my grandchildren and future generations know, that they, read about, that they hear about, that they see, so this oral history archive is very important that Millim are doing, and we don't want to lose those stories, because my dad told them to me when I was very little, and they stayed with me, and they kind of made me want to be a writer, because I thought, he's just conjured up this world. And he used to drive around where he used to live, and he used to say, this is where this happened, this is where this happened. And it was always stuck in my imagination. But he's not the only one. I mean, and today to see people turn up, in their 80s and 90s and talk beautifully about these moments, that's really what stuck with me.
Just to remind our audience, if you do have questions for either Anthony or Mike, do put them in the Q&A in the next few minutes. You were talking about characters, and I think there's a general acknowledgement. In fact, I think probably your father might have said this to me. These characters are gone. Do you think they are gone, or do you just think we don't see them or recognise them?
Good question.
It's hard to. That's a really difficult question. My gut feeling is that they probably are characters, but they're not as open as they were then. There was a certain type of freedom about the way they lived, I think, then. There was a sort of almost like an East European vivacity, which I don't think, I might be wrong, we've lost a little bit of. I mean, what I enjoyed, particularly, I'm sure Anthony did as well, when we read the transcripts, were the very colourful shopkeepers, the people who ran the chicken shops or the fish stalls or the grocery shops and so on. And, the kind of antics that went on in those shops. Today everything is rather pristine, and everything's very hygienic and very very ordered. In those days, and I remember it as well, if you went into Schiffer's chicken poultry shop on Chapeltown Road, everyone was shouting at each other. There was lots of kind of bargaining going on. You call that the price of chicken, you call that a hen, all that kind of thing. It had a certain European or East European vivacity that I think we've kind of lost through who knows what.
I mean, I wonder, are we the right people to ask about that? Because ask our children and grandchildren and younger people today about that. Because all I know is that come the Seder, every Seder there'd be a table full of fantastic characters, and if I just got my tape recorder out and put it there, and I thought, this would just make the funniest, most moving play of all. And I think we can all relate to that, because you'd invite, wouldn't you, your auntie or you call her auntie or uncle, someone who would come and only be there for Pesach and around the Seder table. And, Mike's mum, for example, Millie, used to come and sit around our table, and she was a fantastic storyteller and very funny and very sharp. And, and my mum would be there, and then there'd be, this guy called Tony who played the violin and was deaf. And, you just have so many different characters, and you just took it for granted. So I don't think there are those characters around. But then what if our children and grandchildren are saying the same about us? Oh, you see, my dad's it's like in Friday Night Dinner, isn't it? The dad in Friday Night Dinner, played by Paul Ritter, I think he is, sadly no longer with us. But, he'd take his top off, and he'd always go around topless because it was too hot. And actually, it's kind of a Jewish thing to do, because he would, and then he'd greet his son's girlfriends and call them, females or whatever. These eccentricities that take place. Maybe we are the characters, and our children and grandchildren are thinking that about us. So all I know is that, I loved listening to the stories. I had, a grandmother who was from Glasgow called Rosa, grandmother Mary, who would just sit and swear, and when she didn't want me to hear anything and say swear words or gossip, she'd talk in Yiddish, and then Harry, Clavane, and they were all such great, and I'd just sit around and listen to them, and it was just a different world. It was like watching a play or a film or reading a book. You were just in another world, but a world, as I said, that had gone. So maybe that's what. Maybe we are the new characters. I don't.
Also, a lot of. I mean, the people living were younger or were working those times were in really tough. It's a really tough world for them, wasn't it? Today we asked around the people who came. What kind of world were you in? And they were all, tailoring, cabinet making.
Yeah,
these are tough ways of making a living.
Remembering my grandparents who would have been my age when I was young, and they were old. They were wrinkled. They were perhaps unwell in certain ways, but they were old, and all of that. Thankfully, that's gone by the wayside. This is a play, and both of you've written plays and you've written books. How is it different? Which is easier? Which is more enjoyable? Are they just completely different experiences?
Well, I have to say I like writing plays more, and although it was based on interviews, I love making things up because it cuts out having to do all that research when you can just sort of invent things. And so I really enjoy the fiction side of it, because when you are doing the non-fiction and you're so I've written both type of things in book form. I think the 3 books I've written, well, I think I should know, they're all non-fiction, and they take months, years of research, and you can't get any facts wrong at all. But when you're in the business of writing plays, which do have an element of invention and fictionalization, I love the freedom you get. And even today, and this is a second answer to your question, when I'm writing a book, I'm doing it by myself. And in the end, an editor looks at it and edits it. But I love the collaboration. So for me, it's been great privilege.
So how's that worked? How is the process?
We now hate each other. We don't talk to each other.
Progress now.
He's not coming around for he's off crossed him off my Hanukkah list. No,
well, it's in different ways, isn't it? I mean, we don't live in the same town, we don't live in the same place, so we had to engineer ways of meeting up, essentially, because it was always best to be face to face. The most bizarre, I think, was having staying in a bed and breakfast in Harwich, kind of down at heel bed and breakfast with a rowdy pub underneath. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do.
So we had to find ways of actually physically working together, but we did a bit on Zoom. I don't know whether there is a handbook of how to collaborate, but we kind of made it up as we went along, didn't we? Because I don't know about you, I don't think I've collaborated on a play before.
Well, I did. I collaborated with someone called Nick Stimson on Promised Land and Leeds Lads, which were both community plays, and it was very different. So I would write something, send it to Nick. Nick would write it, send it back. But with Mike, it was a bit more because I think we are related. I mean, I know we are related, but we are cousins. I mean, I think is it once removed, twice removed?
Who knows?
But we saw a lot of each other when we were sort of growing up, and we've always liked each other. But it was a great way to sort of spend more time together. I think I've enjoyed it partly because we get on very well, and it's nice to spend time with people in your family who because we'll have to fess up now. Neither of us live in Leeds anymore. Yeah,
it can be told.
I have to reveal. This is the sort of big reveals tonight. but obviously we were born and grew up in Leeds. But and as you said earlier, I describe it as being in exile down south. And but for people who don't live in Leeds anymore, we write a lot about Leeds. I mean, you know, I've written a book and another book about it, and here I am writing a play, and I've written plays about Leeds, and you're writing about Maya. So there's something about Leeds, and there's something about the Jewish community of Leeds. And yeah, I mean, I've wanted to do this for some time, and we just hang out together a bit more than we used to, and end up writing. And it sort of seems to be, I know I was joking about we've fallen out. We've never had a bad word between us, have we? Really?
No, it's kind of.
Do you sort of write the dialogue between you, or does one of you write a bit and then flick it over to the other? Is it genuinely a sort of joint enterprise?
I think if I remember, it's hard to. We wrote it several months ago now, but I think what the process was that we would both have a go at writing, part of a scene, and then swapping it over. What do you think? Can you rewrite it? What perhaps add something in? It was that. I don't think we didn't. Oh, there was a time that we did just sat down with a blank page, and started writing from the verbatim script, wasn't it? So that got us going in a way.
I think with this kind of writing, where you've got the interviews that have been transcribed, and you imagine that it's like being a sculptor who's sculpting from the material, and then you're sort of chipping away, and then you start to shape the material. We were lucky to have this material to start with, and but it was a question of thinking, where does that go? Let's put all the reminiscences about the Judean Club together. Let's put all the reminiscences about going to Cantors together. Let's put the reminiscences of how I met my husband, wife together, and then start shaping them. But yeah, I think that it was a new thing in that I was meeting up. I mean, previously I've written with someone, and we sort of we've done it electronically. I'll email you this, but I somehow felt, because we were very personally involved, and we knew the material so well, meeting up in the flesh is this sort of old-fashioned type of idea, isn't it? I mean, this is on Zoom, but we're here in the flesh. But I love the idea. It's like normally when if you give talks and things, you like the audiences to be out there, asking questions and interacting and bouncing off. But I think we wanted to meet up, and it was a question of where do we meet up. And I like to sit next to the person and sit next to Mike and try out stuff and say, you do this, and then talk about it, and then wake up in the morning. If we might have gone to a hotel and we've been, had a nice meal, and then talked about it over the meal. And then suddenly an idea comes to you, and then suddenly an idea comes to Mike, and then in the morning, so yeah, we're going to work on that. So I get up early in the morning, and I'm fired up and inspired, and I write it. So I remember that happening. I can't even remember where that hotel was.
I do remember we
flying.
Well, I was just about to say we chose this country house or country hotel. We thought we'd get an away day, really quiet hotel, middle of the countryside, middle of nowhere. Had a meeting room which we could hire for the day, which kind of very cheap, I think it was. So, but we didn't know, or we didn't realise, was it's on the Stansted Airport flight path. And I mean the flight path. I mean, the planes were going over at rooftop level every few minutes throughout the day and most of the night, I think, wasn't it? So the idea of a peaceful getaway didn't work. But still, it was an experience, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was funny.
Now, you mentioned Lawrence Cantor, son of the owner. Are you still in touch? Are you still in touch with him?
Not directly, no, but I know he's in touch with my old friend Anthony Green, who was the editor of Shabbat Shalom, isn't he? And Anthony and I went to Hare Hills together with Lawrence. We were all schoolmates together, so I'm not personally in touch. And I was hoping I would meet him, but I don't think he's coming over for the play, which is a shame. But one day, hopefully in Israel, we'll get when Meet Me at Cantors has his Israel tour. Hopefully, we'll meet up.
So he's in Israel, and I think
Israel.
you suggested it was a couple of decades when they sold it. I think it's probably more like pushing 50 years.
Yes,
that they.
You're right.
I think it was mid-70s.
Gosh, yeah.
Mid-70s.
And you could tell it wasn't Jewish anymore because they started selling fried chicken. That was, that was like the sign, which meant
That's right.
not for the observant
No.
customers
No.
anymore. I just wondered to conclude if you felt there was a serious message in this play, if there was something that people should take away from it, if there was something people could learn maybe from watching it.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think that it's to cherish the, first of all, just cherish your parents and grandparents, but cherish the stories that they tell, and make sure they're not lost by a certain generation dying out, because you want to keep these amazing stories, in the memory of the community. And yeah, I think it's the one serious point I'd say is, and Jewish, non-Jewish, it doesn't matter, but I think we should all listen to what our parents and grandparents say, not what they tell us to do. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, because sometimes, a little bit of rebellion is quite a good thing. But what I mean is the storytelling. If we listen to their stories, and I think record them and keep them as an archive, I think that's one thing that is important, because we've said it. This is the thing, Jonathan. We've said for years, Mike and I, we should write about this, and it took a while. I think we've been saying it for 2 decades, although my 2 decades is often like 5 decades. But no, we have been saying it since we were both in, I was in my 20s, but we've been saying we must get together and do it. And we finally got around to doing it. And so it's important. I mean, in a way, I wish I'd have done it earlier, because I would have loved to have got my mum's stories down as well. She's sadly no longer with us. And a lot of that generation, I would have loved to have got their stories. But I remember them, and I use my memory. But there's nothing better than just getting it firsthand, from the mouths of the people who live there. So cherish your grandparents' stories is the serious message.
I think also to remind ourselves that the community then, as it is now, is a vibrant, semi-self-sufficient, happy community. It's not a tragic community. It's not a community that has been scarred, by terrible pogroms and by terrible histories, which I think the outside world tends to think of. In fact, we had, without naming names, but we had, it was said to us, wasn't it? Is this going to be a play about the Holocaust? Or is this going to be a play about, anti-Semitism? We wanted to remind people that Jews are about more than that. I mean, those are very important. Now, I'm a Holocaust educator, so it's very important to me. But, the vibrancy of the Jewish community in Leeds, particularly in Leeds, I think, is something to be celebrated and to be known, I think, that, we shouldn't be predefined by others or even by ourselves in a very restrictive way. So,
just sort of tie that together. There are hidden stories, and there are unsung heroes, and these aren't necessarily kings and queens and politicians and the great celebrities, but these stories deserve to be told. A, because they're just really good stories, but B, we want to know. I mean, you mentioned I was a history teacher and I studied history. I mean, this is what history, recent history, modern history is all about. And I think, when I was at university and I studied history, it was this thing called history from below, and you took groups of people who didn't normally didn't have their voices represented, and you gave them representation. And quite rightly in recent years there's been an attempt to give marginalised groups who don't normally get their voices expressed, in drama or in documentaries, give them a voice. Well, Jewish working class Leeds in the 1950s is not something you see ever on television or see great films made. I mean, you see loads of films made about Jewish New York or Jewish London. But why aren't there the dramas, more drama about and more stories about Jewish Leeds? And as the book From the Leylands to LS17 showed, there's so many stories, and they're still out there.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating to chat about this, and I can't wait to see the play. I'm sure our audience too can't. To say thank you, I have a copy of my cult classic, Vegans in Iceland.
Oh, thank you.
Which will
Nice
start
of you.
conversations, if nothing else.
Oh, thank you.
When you pop that on your coffee table.
Brilliant.
Wow.
Now, the next Millim event is the play we've been discussing this evening. There are a few tickets left, not very many, and they're just £10. So visit our website if you want to go and see the play on Sunday. There are 2 performances, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. You'll also be able to see a display by our partners at The Zone, as well as some portraits of those who shared their stories taken by me. And then on Wednesday, the 13th of September, we present another live event with Lord Daniel Finkelstein, and I'll be chatting to him about his recent book, Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad. That event is at GSAL. Tickets are £8. Again, please book through our website. To be sure you don't miss anything and to know all about what's coming up, you can register for our newsletter on our website, again at millim.org.uk. Online events are free. Live events incur a modest ticket fee, but either way, you can make a small donation to help with our costs if you like. There is a link, I hope, coming up in the chat now. So it remains for me to thank our guests, Anthony Clavane and Mike Levy, once again. Thank you so much for being with us. Looking forward to seeing you all at a future event. And until then, stay safe. See you soon.